I knew the tide was turning when the VP stopped inviting me to roadmap reviews and started calling my platform That Little Hobby. The same platform his team quietly used to salvage a $3.2 million rollout last year. The same one I designed, tested, and deployed after hours. No tools, no time, no bandwidth from Axomotive. Just me, a thermos of black coffee, and a 2013 MacBook that should have retired when Obama did. I wasn't the face of anything. Greg was. Greg, with his blazers and buzzwords, giving TED-style all-hands about engineering empathy, while I was in a back room hot-fixing our integrations to keep the entire logistics system from cratering. They always said I was low maintenance. What they meant was I didn't complain when I got skipped for promo cycles in favor of high-impact collaborators who couldn't configure an IM policy without Slack coaching. I just built the damn thing and let them pretend it was magic. Now here's the part where most stories give you some dramatic betrayal, but it didn't start with a knife in the back. It started with silence. Greg stopped replying to my update threads. Products stopped looping me into spec reviews. Then one night I saw my interface mockups, identical down to the tab layout on a slide during a Q2 planning deck. No attribution, no mention of Inducta, just listed under New Infrastructure Tools Pipeline. That's when I started printing everything. Before we go any deeper, do me one quick favor. If you're listening to this and haven't hit that subscribe button yet, take a second. It helps more than you know, like the video too if you've ever had your work claimed by someone who never read a line of your code. This story's for you. Back to it. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calibrated. See, I'd kept every bit of metadata since 2015. Every commit, every build timestamp, every email where I declined to integrate my tool into Axomotive's stack because I was keeping it separate for licensing clarity. My original employment contract? Still in its envelope, scanned and backed up twice. Page 6 had a clause they'd long forgotten existed, buried under 3 paragraphs of legalese. Employer waives claim to inventions not created on company time, premises, or using proprietary resources. I read that line so many times it started to feel like a poem. That clause was my spine. And Inducta Systems? It wasn't just a sandbox repo anymore. I'd registered it as an LLC last September. Quietly. I paid for the domain myself. The logo was hand-drawn by my niece in Procreate. I'd been soft pitching the engine at DevCon under a different name. Got decent feedback too. I wasn't moving fast. I was moving legally. But Greg never asked. Because Greg never noticed. He was too busy hosting bourbon tastings for the interns and getting featured in some 10 CTOs to watch LinkedIn list written by a brand intern pretending to be a journalist. I don't think he even remembered our first conversation. I do. He said, "I love hiring women in back-end roles. You all tend to avoid the ego fights." I remember thinking, cool. I'm not a woman to you. I'm a demographic. I'd like to say I knew exactly what was coming. But the truth? I was still loyal. Still pushing fixes into prod, still pulling 2 a.m. deploys to stop Greg's favorite customer, Enlaza Freight, from migrating to a competitor. Still the same quiet ghost they relied on but never saw. I thought the clause would protect me, sure, but I didn't expect to need it, not until Friday afternoon, when Greg invited me into his glass-walled office and shut the door. The email came on a Wednesday. Subject line, action required, IP alignment acknowledgement. No context, no meeting invite, just a PDF and a deadline. Greg followed up with a breezy Slack message to the team. Just standard housekeeping. Legal's tightening language across engineering shouldn't affect anything you're doing. Except it did. The memo was 14 pages long and read like it had been written by someone who'd never written code in their life but knew how to weaponize commas. It went beyond boilerplate. This wasn't about protecting Axomotive's stack. It was a land grab. They wanted everything. All derivative works related to software development, whether or not directly linked to active company projects. Open source utilization must be disclosed and approved preemptively. External tooling built by employees may be subject to ownership review. It was like someone had walked into your apartment, looked at your toothbrush, and said, "We're going to need to inventory this too." So I asked Greg directly in the next all-hands Q&A, typed it into the anonymous question queue just to watch him sweat. He didn't. Instead, he laughed, actually laughed and said, "If you're worried about side hustles, just don't build them on company time and don't use our tools. We'll be fine. But just so we're clear, anything that touches Axomotive's pipeline, that's not side work. That's ours." He said it like it was a joke, like I'd already lost. I nodded, smiled even. But something inside me clicked over, like flipping a circuit breaker. I wasn't paranoid, I was pre-auditing. That night, I pulled out the physical copy of my original employment contract. Not the digital scan, the copy. The one I signed in a temp office downtown back when Axomotive still had Innovate or Die posters and weekly bagel mornings. My hand trembled a little as I flipped to the page I remembered by heart. Page 6, paragraph 3. Employer waives any and all claims to inventions not created on company time, premises, or utilizing proprietary resources. There it was, my firewall. I'd built the core diagnostic engine of Inducta on my own machine, in my apartment, between 7:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. most nights. No VPN, no GitHub access from the Axomotive network, no Jira links, no Slack messages. Hell, the coffee I drank while coding it wasn't even expensed. I dug out my time logs. Yes, I kept them. Every day tracked in a spreadsheet since 2014. It started as a way to organize my hours when we were short-staffed. Turned into a habit. I had a clean wall between what I did for Axomotive and what I did for myself. And then I remembered something else. Greg had asked me about the interface once, months ago, offhandedly in the elevator. "What's that dashboard you keep tinkering with?" he said, peeking at my laptop screen. I told him it was just a personal build. "You should bring that in sometime," he smirked. "Might be useful." That offhanded moment was in my calendar notes. Dated. Logged. I printed it too. Something was off. Greg didn't write that memo. He wasn't detail-oriented enough to lace legalese that precise. Someone in legal was preparing something. Maybe an acquisition. Maybe a VC round. Maybe just cleaning house. Whatever it was, they'd started taking inventory. And Greg? He thought I was still just the woman who fixed things quietly, said thank you at the end of every quarter, and didn't make waves. He didn't realize I'd already locked every door he thought he could walk through. I stared at that contract for a long time that night. Then I opened my filing cabinet, slid it back into the sleeve, and started a new folder. Title: Inducta, Defense Prep. They hadn't asked me to sign the new memo yet, but they would. The email had no subject line, just a calendar invite for 4 p.m. Friday with Greg and HR representative Samantha. That's how you know they want you quiet. No flair, no context, just enough time left in the day that no one will notice you're gone until Monday. I walked past the ping pong table, past the kombucha fridge Greg fought to get on the expense budget, past the interns he hired for culture balance. The glass-walled office already had the blinds drawn halfway, like a sad attempt at mercy. Samantha looked nervous, like she wasn't used to people who didn't cry. I wasn't crying. I was listening. Greg gestured to the chair, didn't even pretend to ease in. "We're pivoting," he said. "You've done incredible work. Seriously. Foundational. But we're moving in a more agile direction. Younger energy, faster cycles. I know this is sudden, but today will be your last day." Like I was being thanked for attending a focus group. I nodded. No surprise. The memo. The silence. The fact that our Jira board had been temporarily migrated to a new admin last week. This wasn't about agility. It was about clearing the table before someone noticed who actually built the legs. I asked if I could export my work history from the system. Samantha said she'd check with legal. I didn't push. I didn't need it. Greg pushed back from the desk like a late-night talk show host wrapping a segment. "Look," he said in that performative "we're all friends here" voice. "You've got that side project, that thing you were working on. I always thought it was cool, but just so there's no confusion." He leaned in, all smug mentorship and minty-smelling condescension. "Anything you built while you were here, including your little side hustle, that's ours now." He actually winked. A full, exaggerated, smirking wink like he'd just delivered a zinger on stage. I stared at him for a beat too long. Not angry, just observing, like watching someone walk onto a frozen lake while you quietly note the temperature that week. He thought I was going to argue, or beg, or protest the way they always do in his stories about old guard engineers who couldn't evolve. I just reached into my bag, pulled out my badge, and placed it on the desk. Neatly. like it was a tool I no longer needed. Then I did something that scared him more than yelling ever could. I smiled. Not wide, just enough. "Thanks for the clarity," I said. "It helps to know exactly where we stand." Greg's smirk twitched. Just a little. Samantha looked confused. She hadn't seen that reaction before. Someone who didn't look broken. I stood up, didn't ask about severance, didn't shake hands, just walked out of the glass cage with the grace of someone who already knew they'd won. The kind of calm that only comes when you've seen the punchline ahead of the joke. In the lobby, I paused to take one last look at the wall of framed magazine clippings. Greg had printed every one that mentioned his name, even in passing. One was headlined, "The Quiet Power of Bold Ideas." It hung directly over a quote of his, "We don't hire for code, we hire for character." I almost laughed. The elevator doors opened. I didn't turn around. By the time they realized what I still controlled, I'd be 3 steps ahead. And they'd still be winking at ghosts. They didn't expect me to lawyer up, not the quiet girl in the corner who brought her own monitor from home and still used Vim. They figured I'd pack my tote bag, delete my Git repos, maybe cry in a stairwell, then vanish into the LinkedIn wilderness like all the others. What they didn't realize was I'd been preparing for this exact moment since the first time Greg called me dependable instead of promotable. Monday at 8:02 a.m., their general counsel, Michael something, got an encrypted email from my attorney. Attached was a zip folder titled Inducta Ownership Documentation. Inside were 14 neatly labeled PDFs. The first one? A scanned copy of my original Axomotive employment agreement, signed on a rainy Thursday in 2014. The signature block was crisp, the date clearly legible. But what really mattered, what made that lawyer lean back in his ergonomic chair and blink, was page 6. Highlighted in yellow, just like I'd done myself. Employer waives any and all claims to inventions not created on company time, premises, or utilizing proprietary resources. And then, below it, a note from my attorney. Please see Exhibits B through J for documentation confirming compliance with these conditions. Exhibit B, time logs from 2014 through 2024. Annotated, color-coded. All development on Inducta occurred after 7 Oz p.m., with timestamps synced to my personal MacBook system log. Exhibit C, GitHub commit history. Timestamps aligned with off hours. IP addresses from my home network. Exhibit D, screenshot of the commit level license header from my core engine file, dated 2 years prior, stating proprietary IP, Inducta Systems LLC. Exhibit E, my business license, registered 7 months before Greg's wink, State of Ohio. EIN assigned, legal entity, Inducta Systems. Exhibit F, the trademark filing, still pending but submitted. Exhibit G, deployment logs from the first working prototype hosted on Heroku, billed to my personal card and launched at 12:38 a.m. on a Sunday. Exhibit H, a notarized journal entry I'd kept when Greg asked about the interface in the elevator, complete with the exact phrasing he used. The final file in the folder? A PDF titled Statement of Misrepresentation, detailing Greg's claim during the termination meeting, his assertion that Inducta belonged to Axomotive, timestamped, paraphrased and signed by my attorney as a formal protest of IP overreach. They called it discomfort. But inside that legal office, it was a slow, sharp panic, because they knew what it meant. They hadn't just tried to take my work. They'd put it in a pitch deck. Greg had showcased features in meetings. There were whispers that Axomotive's Q2 rollout would lean heavily on internal tooling improvements that, if you squinted, sounded a lot like Inducta. But now they had a problem. You can't claim ownership of a thing that's been legally documented, time-stamped, and filed under a separate entity. Not when the contract you wrote says otherwise. Not when you never updated that clause. Not when your CTO blurted a claim that directly contradicted your own paper trail. And not when the person you fired already filed the patent disclosure, listing herself as the sole inventor. By Tuesday, my LinkedIn inbox had 3 messages from recruiters at their competitors. One of them attached a screenshot from an internal Axomotive Slack thread, anonymous of course. It said, "Why didn't anyone check the contract?" Why, indeed. The trap wasn't just set, it was triggered, and all they could do now was limp toward the teeth. The first thing they did was panic. The second was dig. Legal pulled every archived email, every DocuSigned form, every onboarding packet from HR's shared drive. They were looking for a golden ticket, some version of my contract with a later date, a modification, anything that would suggest I'd given them even partial rights to my work. They didn't find it, because it didn't exist. No amendments, no IP annex, no hidden NDA buried in a training module. Just the original agreement, scanned in twice. Once when I signed it, once when it got re-uploaded during a system migration in 2019. Both copies had the same clause on page 6, clear as sunlight. What they did find, though, was worse. Greg's emails. Subject, IP clarity, draft language. One of them, dated 3 weeks before my firing, went to legal's junior counsel with a line that made my lawyer actually chuckle. Is there any way to tighten retroactively, like a policy refresh that catches legacy stuff? You don't need to be a litigator to know how that reads in court. They couldn't change the past. And the present? That was already locked down. Because here's what they hadn't known. I'd filed a provisional patent on Inducta's orchestration algorithm 3 days after I registered the LLC. It wasn't flashy tech, not on the surface, but it solved a real problem. Seamless, zero downtime deployment across hybrid cloud environments with built-in rollback logic and dependency-aware patching. Greg used to call that impossible at scale. Turns out, it wasn't. Not with my engine. And now, Axomotive needed it. Their Q2 launch plan depended on the partner network integration layer going live in 6 weeks. They'd already pitched it to distributors and investors, bragged about how fast they'd be able to push updates across client stacks. They even showed a demo, built on the early sandbox version of Inducta Greg's team had quietly cloned before locking me out of staging. But that code? It hadn't been touched since I was fired. And the API keys were dead. Because the real version, the one with the patch logic, the rollback scripting, the memory leak fix, the environment sniffers, that one was never on Axomotive's servers. It lived in a private repo tied to my LLC with commit history signed using my personal GPG key. I hadn't just built Inducta to be useful. I'd built it to be traceable. Every line told a story, and none of it belonged to them. Words started to leak. I got a call from someone I used to work with in BizDev. She didn't say much, just, I don't think they realized how exposed they were until this week. Investors are asking questions now. Not the kind of questions Greg liked. Because if your entire Q2 strategy leans on tech you don't own and you've already told people it's yours, that's not an oversight. That's liability. By Friday, I heard through the grapevine that they'd contacted 3 separate law firms for outside counsel. But it didn't matter how many lawyers they hired. The facts were plain. I had the contract, I had the patent, and I had the only working engine they could have built their future on if they hadn't fired the woman who made it, the same woman they called low maintenance. They'd underestimated me. Now they were trying to negotiate with air. There's a special kind of silence that falls when people realize they've bet the house on a fake blueprint. Not a typo, not a delay, a full-scale hallucination. That was the silence circling Axomotive's boardroom by the end of March, when the first investor called asking to validate integration functionality ahead of disbursement, because someone had finally read the slides Greg had swaggered through at the Q2 kickoff, the ones with graphs, timelines, and an architecture diagram that, if you squinted, looked exactly like Inducta. They hadn't just hinted at it, they'd pitched it. They said the deployment engine was already built, already tested, that it had shaved 40% off staging time in internal trials, and that partner-level licensing would roll out by June. A proprietary solution developed in-house by Axomotive's engineering team. That last line is where everything started to fray. Because the metadata in the repo told a different story. They'd copied an early build months ago, back when I was still soft pitching the tool under the radar, before I shut down public access and made the repo private. They cloned the UI layer and maybe some helper scripts, just enough to fake a demo, but they never got the logic core. That engine was never hosted on company servers. They thought I'd left it open. I hadn't. In fact, I'd done the opposite. The week I got wind of that IP memo, I'd revoked all deployment keys, rotated API access, and rerouted the telemetry endpoints to a ghost server that mirrored basic behavior but logged every access attempt. Greg's team? They were pinging a sandbox copy that hadn't received a real update in 72 days. Their demos. Smoke. Every screen they showed investors ran on mocked data. The system performance graphs were just repurposed staging logs from an unrelated beta. The integration? Hard-coded. But they'd promised it. And in venture, promises become math real fast. Their Q2 forecast assumed 3.5 EINGATs in early access licensing fees. 1.8 dollars of that was already earmarked in internal projections. HR had greenlit 2 new headcount roles in platform ops based on a roadmap built on a tool they didn't control, and, more importantly, never confirmed they owned. I got the first whiff of trouble from a Slack screenshot someone forwarded me. A senior product manager had posted a red flag emoji next to a comment. Has anyone verified we actually have rights to the deployment engine? There was no answer, but the repo logs were clear. Their last pull was in January. After that, the credentials failed. They never noticed or didn't care because they assumed I'd cave, that I'd trade leverage for politeness, that I'd settle for a LinkedIn endorsement and a coffee invite from someone who once called me overly cautious. What they forgot was I'd spent the last 10 years being careful on purpose, because I knew this moment would come. The investors began asking questions, first quietly, then with scheduled calls. Due diligence teams sniffed around. One firm sent an external audit request to confirm IP ownership of the tool described in Axomotive's investor brief. They didn't have the receipts. I did. And those server pings, still coming. I watched in real time as someone from Greg's team tried to bypass my key vault. 3 failed attempts. Same IP, same desperation. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered that wink. They built a dream on something they never owned. Now they were standing in a room full of buyers, holding vapor. April 4th started like any other Thursday, coffee, code, and an inbox full of half-baked questions from people who thought DevOps was just a trendy compound word. But at exactly 10:32 a.m., my lawyer texted me a single line, "Wire confirmed, you're live." $12.5 million, closed, led by Carentech Ventures, Axomotive's loudest competitor in the logistics automation space. The same company Greg once said had no innovation DNA. Turns out they had money and vision, and a particular interest in exclusive deployment engines that could scale across hybrid clouds without combusting on contact. The term sheet was simple and brutal: exclusive IP license, full product control, and formal validation that Inducta's technology had 0 encumbrances. My original Axomotive contract was attached as supporting documentation. Page 6 highlighted like a dagger. They didn't ask for Greg's opinion, they just signed. I barely had time to breathe before Axomotive came crawling. Their general counsel reached out by 2 p.m., this time not through my attorney, but directly. Subject line, request for clarification plus sit-down opportunity. The body of the email was a masterclass in corporate throat clearing. Words like mutual resolution, IP clarity, and collaborative path forward sprinkled between layers of legal cotton candy. No accusations, no threats, just an urgent desire to align expectations before the quarter closes. Translation. They realized what they'd lost. What they thought I'd abandon? I'd just sold the rights to for 8 figures. What they demoed to investors? It was now powering their competition. What Greg called your little side project. It had an engineering team, a roadmap, and a damn logo now, and I wasn't begging for access. I was fielding press inquiries. I didn't respond immediately. I went for a walk, bought myself a burrito the size of my own ego. Then, and only then, I wrote back, "Appreciate the note. At this time, I don't see the need for further discussion. All relevant documentation has already been reviewed by counsel. My rights remain intact." Sent. No sign-off, no signature block, just silence. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't pick up. They tried again, this time through a neutral mediator who used to consult on corporate transitions. She left a voicemail. "I've been asked to facilitate an amicable resolution. There may be interest in a licensing deal if that's something you'd be open to." They wanted to rent what they tried to steal. I played the message twice, saved it to my legal folder. Then I turned my phone off and went back to work. Because I wasn't building to spite them anymore, I was building to replace them. And they knew it. Their only leverage had been the assumption that I'd fold, that I'd want my name off the record, that I'd trade silence for peace. But I didn't want peace. I wanted every partner they'd lied to, every client they'd overpromised, every engineer who'd ever sat through one of Greg's speeches about velocity over ownership. Because now, I was the owner, and Axomotive was just another name on a list of companies that forgot who they fired. The ballroom was too cold, like they'd refrigerated the air to keep startups from sweating through their pitch decks. I wasn't sweating. I was sipping tea and watching the screens flicker through the last of the setup checks backstage. Inducta's logo looped softly on the main panel, white on charcoal, clean, quiet, deliberate. No sparkle, no disruption, just confidence. Tech West Startup Demo Day wasn't just a launch event. It was a spectacle. 6 companies were handpicked to showcase bleeding-edge solutions. Industry heads, investors, analysts, reporters, and in the front row, almost center stage, Axomotive. 4 of their investors sat in a tight cluster, murmuring and checking badges. Next to them, Greg, hair too styled, smile too rehearsed. And beside him, a man I didn't recognize but clocked instantly. Legal. The furrowed brow gave it away. So did the oversized leather binder in his lap. I didn't flinch. I didn't wave. I just waited. When they called my name, introducing Ria Desai, founder of Inducta Systems, I stepped out into the lights. Applause rolled in like cautious thunder. Some polite, some curious. But Greg? His clapping stopped mid-beat the second the screen lit up and the real product loaded. This wasn't the mocked-up beta they'd cloned. This was Inducta 2.3, full hybrid orchestration, live rollback engine, real-time compliance alerts, and seamless failover switching across 3 cloud environments. The dashboard sparkled, not in style, but in speed. Everything they'd bragged about and couldn't deliver, I just launched it. Publicly, seamlessly, in front of the very people they'd sold a lie to. I spoke for 6 minutes, kept it tight, focused on metrics, showed the 44% deployment time reduction for early access partners. Ended on a slide with one word, ownable. Then I clicked the final screen. It was a single quote. Innovation doesn't come from culture decks. It comes from late nights, full logs, and clear lines. The applause came harder that time, louder. A few people stood. But all I looked at was Greg. His face was tight, mouth drawn in that lopsided way people get when their reality shifts and they haven't figured out who to blame yet. But the lawyer? He stood, walked slowly over, no handshake, no small talk. He opened the leather binder and flipped once, then held up my original employment contract, page 6 facing out. A fluorescent pink sticky note flagged the paragraph like a crime scene. I nodded. He didn't speak. He didn't have to, because that clause, the one Greg ignored, the one they bet the company roadmap against, had just become a line in sand, steel, and court precedent. They'd spent 6 weeks trying to frame my silence as a void they could fill. Now that void had a name, a product, and a room full of backers, and it didn't belong to them. I didn't wait for follow-ups. I stepped off stage, unplugged my clicker, and walked straight into the hallway. The event coordinator ran up with congratulations. Someone from Forbes asked for a quote. I smiled, declined, and ducked into a quiet lounge. Alone, I exhaled. Not relief, not triumph, just a return. The product was out. The silence was broken. And page 6, it had been read, out loud, in public. There was no going back. 3 weeks later, buried somewhere between a redlined indemnity clause and a sanitized statement of full compliance review, a line disappeared. Quietly, without apology, without alert. The same lawyer who approached me after demo day, tight-lipped, binder in hand, submitted an updated filing to the SEC in preparation for Axomotive's upcoming acquisition. In it, one entire section was gone, all language pertaining to retained intellectual property and associated derivative works. Erased, scrubbed like it never existed. They didn't send me a letter, didn't issue a statement. There was no oops, no nod to what they'd tried to do, just silence, the kind that says we'd rather disappear the evidence than admit the loss. But I saw the filing. My lawyer sent me a copy with a subject line that read simply, "They folded." No fanfare, just fact. Meanwhile, Inducta was flying. 2 months after TechWest, we closed a $41 million Series A, led by Stonewater Capital with 2 other strategic partners in tow. The raise was clean, aggressive, oversubscribed by 3x. They didn't blink at the valuation, not once, because they saw what Greg and his crew never did: receipts, documentation, dates, signatures, logs, backups, a chain of custody longer than most companies' entire dev history. They asked about Axomotive during due diligence. I didn't have to say much. I showed them the clause. I showed them the time-stamped memo I never signed. I showed them the legal folder that had been quietly growing since 2017. And then I showed them what I'd built, what Greg had called your little side project. The press release went out on a Monday. I didn't write it, but I reviewed every line. I approved the quote. I approved the headline, but there was one part I made sure stayed untouched. Footnote number 39. Tucked just beneath the boilerplate about funding round terms, it read, "Built independently while employed under a carve-out clause." 10 words. That's all. No names, no lawsuits, no dragged reputations, just truth, the kind that echoes. Greg still posts on LinkedIn, motivational blurbs, coffee cup metaphors. He hasn't mentioned the demo, or the filing, or the fact that his biggest competitor is now powered by the thing he tried to claim without reading the fine print. But I don't need him to say it, because every time he opens his inbox or hears Inducta mentioned on an earnings call or reads a client quote about deployment transparency, he'll remember what I never raised my voice to say. Page 6. I kept it. And that's why I kept everything else.